Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by adaQuest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I am here today with the CEO of adaQuest, Hiram Machado. Hiram, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Mark. Good to be here.
Likewise. Hey, so we're getting to the end of 2018 here, and thought it'd be a good idea to kind of take a look at some current events and then maybe give a look forward, look into the crystal ball, so to speak, as what we can expect in terms of cybersecurity in 2019. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
Well, first off, what I see is that there's an increasingly greater amount of attention on large data breaches. And it seems, I don't know if the frequency is increasing or the severity is increasing, but definitely they're on the front page a lot more often. So either the news outlets are becoming more aware of it, the regulatory bodies, or just the general public. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I do believe the frequency is definitely increasing. When you look at out there, today there is more digital data than ever before, of course, right? And that trend will continue, right? As everything becomes more and more digital. And that means more, more material. Right. For attackers to exploit and to explore. There is more passwords out there that have been already being breached, and it's in the black market right now, being transacted, right? And they are using those passwords to infiltrate corporations and whatever they can.
So companies have a lot more data; they're storing more data, and then there are more tools and avenues to exploit platforms to access that data, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I've heard you make the point sometimes that data can be a great asset, but it also can be a liability, right?
Data is definitely a liability, especially data that you don't need, right? It's I do the analogy of having if you work with chemicals, right? And you don't want to store more chemicals in your garage than what you absolutely need.
Absolutely
right?
not. Get rid of them
because but you do need some. It's kind of inevitable. But in case of an accident or something happens, you want to have the minimum amount of chemicals there, so the effect of that accident is not as bad. So it's same thing for data. You want to have the minimum amount of data, just what you need. Should you have an accident, you know that your exposure to it or the damage it might cause is going to be limited as much as you can.
Right, and there's a couple different kinds of exposure. One is the actual damage that it can cause to you as a company or to the individuals that data is related to. But there's also some regulatory damages that can take place. If you are holding data that you don't actually have a business case for, and there's a breach, or if you don't notify regulatory bodies in the appropriate amount of time, there's a liability issue there as well, right?
Yeah, and it's the balance between complying with regulations. There will be regulation, however, that will hold you accountable for keeping the data for a certain amount of time, right? And you absolutely should and will maintain that data for that amount of time, but probably not for any more than that amount of time.
Exactly.
Right? And that's.
We'll take a look at a couple of recent breaches. Cathay Pacific, the flagship airline for Hong Kong, they had a breach early this year. And the data for over 9 million people was compromised. And that included expired credit card numbers, passport information, Hong Kong ID card numbers, millions of names and phone numbers and email addresses. And the breach started, or they identified it in March, okay? And they didn't report to the authorities until October, okay? And it's very interesting because I was in Hong Kong when this was on the front page of the South China Morning Post, and there was a quote. And I'm going to read you the quote from a representative from the Hong Kong Police Department. He said, "Waiting 6 or 7 months and undertaking a series of actions they claim to be an investigation or remedial action is actually, from a law enforcement point of view, tampering with evidence." So not only is it being not following the reporting guidelines, it could be considered as a criminal act of tampering with evidence, because what you're doing is you're kind of covering the trail so that the regulators could get in there or can't get in there and identify what actually happened. And that's a really interesting perspective, and I don't think we've heard that much like that in the past. We'll probably hear more of that going forward.
Oh, absolutely. And whether it's intentionally or not, right? Whether there was, I have seen situations and I have had clients that were legitimately trying to identify the issue, get to the bottom of it, and fully understand everything before they comply. But meanwhile, time is passing, right? And they are now, breaching they're entering into another problem, which is no compliance with some of those regulations. So finding that balance is critical, right? And the moment that you identify every organization, you must understand, what am I liable to? What are the regulations that I must comply with? And what do those regulations demand of me?
Well, for example, with GDPR, I think the reporting guidelines requirements are 72 hours, right?
72, yes.
Okay. And a lot of organizations will say, well, we're not sure if we fall under GDPR or if that really affects us because, we don't have many employees there or we don't have customers there. And oftentimes there's some uncertainty. One thing I'd like to say is okay, if you're not sure about GDPR, you should be concerned with other regulatory bodies. For example, if you're doing business in California, if you're doing business in China. Brazil recently enacted something very similar to GDPR, right?
It's very similar. It's pretty much the same thing.
And it was interesting because in this same breach, this Cathay Pacific breach, the newspaper reported that that it might be difficult for Hong Kong customers to receive damages, and they also said that the Cathay Pacific probably wouldn't have to worry about GDPR because, they said, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation requires companies do disclose data breaches within 72 hours, but companies in Hong Kong are not required by law to promptly report any leak. That actually isn't true, right? Because if the company is dealing with data that relates to an EU resident, right, then they are required. And I'm guessing of what was the number? 9 million people, because the population of Hong Kong is, I think, only about 5-6 million. Maybe, we'll look it up afterwards. 7 million maximum. I'm going to go out on a limb here. And so some of those people were probably EU residents. And if a significant number were, they definitely would have to report under GDPR.
And that's an important thing for, especially when it comes to GDPR, for organizations to understand. It's not about location. It's about what kind of data are you dealing with. And like you said, Mark, if you're dealing with European citizen data, you are already, that's by default, you now must comply with GDPR.
Right. And you might, in the case of Cathay, they might be the controller of the data, right? They're collecting that data, but they might say, oh, well, our loyalty program provider is actually processing all that data. Well, guess what? If you're the controller, you're liable for the activities or the security posture of that processor.
Right. And that's a very important concept for organizations to understand too. And I have seen people getting confused with this over and over, which is it's not only about dealing with the data in the technical aspect of how you collect the data. It's the responsibility. If you are the one inquiring, right, under your brand, inquiring these European citizens to give their information to you, it doesn't matter who processes it. You're now liable to make sure that data is properly handled. Even if it's a third party handling on your behalf, it's still your responsibility and they're legally liable.
Absolutely. And it comes back to, again, I think we're just starting to really gather some strong momentum in terms of awareness of what companies' liabilities are, what their responsibilities are. The general public is becoming, at least in North America anyway, much more aware and concerned about abuses of their data and whether there's been a breach. I think the EU has been kind of ahead of us in terms of that, understanding that the individuals have the right to protect their data, but the momentum is increasing here.
And I think EU is ahead of probably most everyone else around the globe, but they are definitely, creating a trend. You can see it, as you mentioned, in Brazil, which just created a new law, which is just like GDPR. The state of California, the same thing. Regulations are regulators around the globe are everybody's looking into this issue. And if I was to think about 2019, I can see a lot more coming up in 2019, like the California, like the Brazil, and that's going to pop up everywhere. And I would expect everything to follow, give and taken, the footsteps of GDPR. So there is something to be said about, even if you're not liable to comply with GDPR. There are certain things in GDPR that's probably you can look at it as good and best practice, right?
Absolutely.
And you probably should at least take a look at it and see what are the best practices that we need to apply here.
Because there's some key areas. One is collecting only data that is relevant to your business or that you have a business need to collect. Okay. Another one is, do you have the proper controls in place to protect that data? Okay, whether that's encryption, de-identification, etc. And another one is are you maintaining the appropriate security posture? And then there are some other things like the right to be forgotten and the right of rectification. And do you have processes in place to manage those requests, right? And those processes and that security posture, those data protection principles, may not have to mirror exactly what you're saying, the GDPR regulations, but in general, most countries and most regulatory bodies are moving in that direction. So you're going to need to do something.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to take a look at one other breach because I think it ties into some of the work that we do at adaQuest, and that's Marriott. Marriott, they acquired the Starwood chain of hotels, and it took Marriott 4 years to identify the breach, okay? And after they identified it, they still took 20 days to alert the people that were affected by the breach. So again, it was a big delay. Now, part of that is, I'm going to quote a security specialist. He said basically when Marriott acquired Starwood, it needed to treat the newly acquired infrastructure and applications and systems as a business critical risk until they could identify and map out the new and expanded attack surface and prioritize risk reduction. That was a quote from Simon Rowe. He's product manager of Outpost 24. Now, can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the risks involved when you acquire another organization?
Absolutely. That's something that we are very involved with many of our customers. And when usually a bigger organization acquires a small organization or a smaller organization, that smaller organization may or may not have all of the security controls in place, at the same level and standards that a bigger organization usually maintains it. So as soon as that's announced, or as soon as there is even a speculation that company may be targeted by an acquisition, that's an opportunity for attackers. That's an opportunity for them to infiltrate themselves into that organization and just wait for the bigger organization to come in, connect the pipes, and they can now get into the larger organizations. It's very common for hackers to look for vendors, smaller providers, that provide people that provide services to larger organizations to infiltrate the larger organization through them. Hence, the need to, for every acquisition, even before announcement, the proper due diligence over, and assessment of the current IT infrastructure of the acquired organizations should be done, and proper security controls should be in place before they connect the pipes, if you will, before any integration ever takes place. Security assessment and hardening of those security controls, if not properly set up, should happen before integration. That's what we advise our customers to do and how we go about it when we're involved on.
Well, that's some very good advice, and it's interesting because I know that when companies or organizations are going through the acquisition process, they do a risk assessment, but it's usually related to the financial risk, or if they're taking on employees, the social costs or the HR related risks, right? We don't often hear about companies looking at the potential data protection or IT security risks. Right. And I gotta guess, I mean, with news like this and the increasing focus on data protection, IT security, that it's going to be important.
Another interesting dynamic on this acquisition process is that the ROI of an acquisition is integration, right?
Right.
You know, most companies are acquiring another organization because it does make sense for them to integrate and leverage the best of each organization. So usually there is this eagerness that, like, companies, we are acquiring them and we want that integration to take place as soon as possible, so we can fully, leverage all of the benefits in the reasons why we made this acquisition in the first place.
Absolutely.
So and cybersecurity may be overlooked as part of that due to that eagerness to get
I've
together.
seen companies. Like in the localization industry, companies that acquired organizations and 2 or 3 years later still hadn't integrated their IT platforms. So they're missing out on a lot of that leverage. And in that industry, it could be leveraging in terms of payments, or the freelance network, or the HR platform. And I think a lot of companies underestimate the complexity going in, and it could probably pay dividends to do a little planning on the front side.
And I have also seen very larger organizations with a 2 to 3 years backlog of acquired companies that have not been integrated.
Wow. Okay. Hey, recently there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how CISOs are getting more autonomy in organizations. Did you happen to catch that?
Absolutely. I think the role of the CISO is definitely growing a lot as for every organization, the attack surface is increasing as things get digitalized, right? And the importance of protecting data becomes more and more important. And there is a new trend of really trying to separate, right, the CISO from the CIO. Right? And really have them as two different departments. The CIO job is to leverage technology and utilize technology as much as you can, as quickly as you can, as efficiently as you can. And the CISO job becomes protecting those. And the idea of separating them is the notion that if you're trying to maximize in terms of time, you might end up compromising, right, cybersecurity in lieu of speed to market or something like that. And have that counterbalance, and having the CISO at the same level of the CIO, right, to provide that counterbalance and make sure that there is the right amount of compromise, right, is a new trend that we have seen.
So how would you explain that, or the importance of that, to an organization where they say, look, we get that the CIO, he is running an operation that helps us to optimize or run our business in a more efficient manner, right? We get the head of marketing, they're helping to develop our brand or sell more products. So we get the sales guys, the head of sales, chief revenue officer. We get what the CFO does. But the CIO, how are they contributing to the CISO, how is the CISO contributing to the bottom line?
Well, some of it is all about what kind of risk are you incurring. And many, especially mid-sized business, there is a new statistic that shows that a lot of the small and mid-sized business cannot survive a attack. They do not survive once they are hacked or they are compromised. They go out of business. So the CISO is trying to protect your brand and protect your assets. Mm-hmm. So you are either not out of business or are not suffering enough that can really be detrimental to your organization. So I think the understanding that, and when you put in perspective that hackers are out there, it will happen.
Right.
It's not a matter of if it will, it's when it will, right? So hence the importance of the CISO, because it's happening, it will happen. We see this with big names, as we have mentioned here today, and it doesn't make the news, but there is tons of small business every day being hacked and being compromised, and some of them going out of business.
So if I could summarize our conversation so far, we're going to see an increasing awareness by the general public in terms of their rights and their risks related to data protection or data leakage. We're going to see companies that are going to be working harder to protect data. We're going to see governments that are creating stricter controls and regulations related to data protection and cybersecurity. And we're also going to see companies probably adopting either more CISOs or giving the CISO an equal place at the board level or
Yes.
at the C level, right? So,
Absolutely.
okay, those are all interesting trends. Let's look a little bit about what adaQuest is going to be doing in the context of all of that. I mean, what are some of the areas that adaQuest is most active right now in relation to what we just discussed?
Yeah.
The protection of data, IT security, etc.
Yeah, I think one of the most popular thing that we are doing right now is what we call the CIE, the Customer Immerse Experience,
Right.
Around compliance. We have, in partnership with Microsoft, we have a package that we can go to organizations and really bring the leadership team together, mostly the leadership team together, in exercise. We show them, right, hands-on, what happens if you receive an email that is compromised, and here it is, in a very secure environment, what happens to that email and how that data get compromised, and what if you try to send an email out of the organization and you have a number of credit cards in it and you try to forward that email to an outside. If you have the right controls in place, what happens and how that gets, how can that be prevented? So it's very enlightening to a lot of the executives, right, when they have the opportunity to, hands-on experience what some threats, how some threats behave, and also how some security controls, addresses some of those challenges.
Right. So basically, we're not going in with a bunch of slides and saying, here are some concept and here are the names of some tools. We're actually giving them a chance to use those tools and see how they actually work. And I think they typically last about 3 to 4 hours for a CIE.
Yeah, about 3 hours. Yeah, about 3 to 4.
And what our facilitators are really good at is they actually map out use cases that are directly related to the typical use cases of a company. So, for example, if a company has a lot of BYOD devices, they will map out use cases where the company can protect corporate data on those devices, but not swipe personal data. Yeah. They'll map out use cases for example, if they're using iOS devices or if they're using corporate devices, if they have company apps, or basically, and they can also map it out based upon role, right? By, the financial officer or the financial team will need access and rights to a certain set of data, but your salespeople, they don't need that data, and maybe the HR people need even access to even more sensitive data. So you need to be able to map all that out.
Yeah, and absolutely. And one concept that I think it's important for people to understand and realize, there is no outsourcing of cybersecurity, right? The business owners, you own the data, right? Now, IT may be the custodian of that data because they set up the database, they set up the systems that will enable you as a business owner, as a VP of HR or VP of finance or marketing. They will provide you technology that will enable you to handle that data. But they are the custodians of the data, right? You're the business owner as a director of finance or VP of finance, as a VP of HR. You own the data. Therefore, you too have responsibility over cybersecurity of that data, right? And you have to partner with, your IT department, partner with your CISO if you have one, to make sure that the data is protected. But don't outsource it. It's not an outsourcing thing. Don't say, well, I have a CISO. He's responsible for cybersecurity. No, everybody is. And the CIE is a good way to show that, how everybody can contribute and be part of and be alert and understand what they can do and what their part is around cybersecurity in their organization.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the first steps to improving your security posture is just creating awareness amongst everybody in your organization in terms of potential threats, or what does a phishing email look like, or what what are some bad security practices that you should avoid, right? And bad password hygiene, for example, right? So just create some initial awareness there, and by creating awareness, one, you're shutting down some attack vectors, hopefully, but also you're telling people, like what you just said, hey, this is also your responsibility too. Don't just walk around and think like, hey, everything's okay. No. I mean, everybody has to do their part. What are, in terms of the actual work that adaQuest is doing with large organizations, I think we're doing a lot of work around MFA, conditional access. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and I think that the popularization of BYOD, right? Bring your own device, that is pretty much the norm nowadays, right? Where organizations now, there's no more, here is your BlackBerry for your business calls, and use whatever you want personally. Now everybody wants to use their own personal phone, or even sometimes personal computers. Plus the proliferation of IoT, Internet of Things, that basically means lots of devices that connects to the network, connects to your infrastructure. With that in mind, with all of that thing, I think Intune as a MDM, as a device management tool, is becoming more and more popular. We have done a lot of work around Intune, and I think that's going to be a trend for 2019 as IoT becomes more and more popular, and that device management and the ability to manage the devices that connect to the network. Those are usually referred to as endpoints, right? And in cybersecurity, you can consider that every endpoint is a vector of attack, right? There is a possibility of an intruder to come through that endpoints. So making sure that organizations map out, what are the endpoints connected to our network? Do they have the right protection? Do we have the right policies to govern, the interaction between that endpoint device and how they connect and interact with data in our infrastructure? Can
you give a couple examples of policies? Because some people don't fully get the concept. If you're not super technical, well, I wouldn't even say super technical, but if you're not actually doing the Intune deployment, you might not get what a policy is versus a policy that's on a piece of paper versus an Intune policy.
Absolutely, yes. Well, policy could be, for example, you could limit the ability to connect endpoints device unless they're listed, right, on your, that's called whitelist, right? So you basically collect the identification of that device and say, only these device or these devices are allowed to, or you can rather create some level of conditional access, right? Where you say, this device can connect as long as it's within, if it's in this city, right? But as long as these devices connect from someplace else, I'll have additional layers of, I'll add additional layers of authentication, or prevent that device from connecting altogether, depending on your policies. But those are business discussions to be had in the organization. But for example, if that device if somebody that usually do not travel out of the standard travels and connect from someplace else, I want to make sure that I validate that person, it is indeed a person that I allow to connect here. And we might trigger a second factor authentication, referred to as MFA, right? And say, I'm going to send a code to his phone, and unless he types that code, I'm not going to allow him in. Not to count, antivirus and the ability to say, these are the antivirus. We push the latest and greatest antivirus to every endpoint device, and we may or may not allow the end user to make changes to that antivirus configuration. And that's an example of policy that you establish on the business level and say, this is how we operate here, and users can have their device, but they cannot change the configuration of antivirus, for example, without our control. Those are some of the examples.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. We're, I guess, getting close to the end of the session, but any other thoughts related to what we can expect in 2019?
Yeah, I think you summarize it pretty well early on. I think regulation, is going to continue on being a big topic. I think we'll see more. Unfortunately, we'll see more attacks. Things are advancing very quickly, and it will be. I really believe that the next several years is going to be, a pull and push kind of situation where new form of attacks will pop up, and we're going to have to defend against those, and new forms of defending is going to be pop up. And I think that the professionals of cybersecurity have to stay on top of this, more so than previous years. And I think that we do need, every organization need to think about how do we give enough awareness to the whole organization, starting with the executive team, right? How do we get the executive team to understand what's their role in the cybersecurity, and then from there propagate to every member of the organization what their role is around cybersecurity of that organization.
Excellent. Well, I think that was a great summary and some really good advice. Hiram, it was great talking with you, and wish you the best in 2019.
Likewise. Thank you, Mark.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance. Join our hosts as they discuss a wide range of topics and speak with leading cybersecurity, technology, and compliance experts. Now is the time for Secure Talk.